Everyone, I'm Vina. Today we're going to be talking about balancing identity, being queer and Indo-Caribbean, and we have a full panel of lovely people. We're all going to talk about our experiences and kind of how we balance our identities, being both queer and Indo-Caribbean people, and that those things are not mutually exclusive, although it can kind of feel like it. It's important to note that these identities can mutually exist, and this intersection of them creates unique experiences that we cannot generalize. So I think it's really great that we have such a diverse panel. And yeah, so if everybody can just introduce themselves, I'll start, I guess. I'm Vina. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as pansexual. I don't know who wants to go first. Somebody jump in.
I'm Mari. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as bisexual and gender fluid.
I'm Becky, and I'm lesbian, and my pronouns are she, her.
My name is Ryan. I use he, him, and identify as gay.
Hi, I'm Nandini. My pronouns are they, he, and I'm trans, genderqueer, and pansexual.
So the first kind of topic we're going to start with is coming to terms with your gender identity or sexuality, or both, while navigating through the Indo-Caribbean culture. So kind of in reference to coming out, and when we were kind of developing the questions, Ryan brought up a really important point that I kind of thought, or I really resonated with, I guess. Just that the traditional sense of coming out, like I never thought included me, like was not in the cards for me, and still I don't really know if it is, or and I never really thought anybody else had that experience as well. So maybe if Ryan, if you wanted to kind of start here and talk about that a bit more, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah, so I'll start. I can say, yeah, I definitely think so. Coming out is really, it's when I often talk about it, I see it as something, the way it exists, as something that exists for white people by white people. Because there are certain sorts of regulations and rules that come out specifically in Canada, or just in the global north with coming out, where you have to like wave your rainbow flag, and you have to like, everyone in your life has to know about it. And if you don't follow these rules, you're not a real queer, and all these sorts of things. And when we originally were talking about this, I always think about, the ways in which these same people that create these rules also cast the Caribbean as like a site of like absolute homophobia and absolute transphobia. And again, it's systems of like these regulations of what it means to be queer, or like, what we call like homonormativity, right? Of like normative ways of being queer, are really in existence to also like colonize and pathologize often like queer people of color, right? And it doesn't often take into account the ways in which Caribbean people specifically have been organizing on the road, resisting, troubling, pushing back, mashing it up literally for hundreds of years, right? Like queer life has always existed in the Caribbean, and so I think it's really for me, all these discourse of like, oh my God, you have to come out and all this sort of stuff. It's like, it's honestly for me, it's like not even an issue, because especially for a lot of Caribbean people, like people know, like I even like, like previously, like I was in a 5-year relationship, and I remember like when it ended, one of my aunts was just like, so are you on the road again? Like, who have you met? And I was just like, what? Because I had never had a conversation with her about my queerness. And she was like, we all know. Like, it's not like, it's also, I'm a drag queen. So like, I mean, if you Google my name, there's going to be pictures that come up, right? You're going to see me in a carnival outfit, not looking like this. But I think Caribbean communities, we've also, I mean, there is homophobia, like that, we have to be real. Like, obviously our communities are still struggling with homophobia and transphobia. But also Caribbean people don't have to abide by these regulations of what it means to be queer, that are constructed by people that don't speak for us, And so I think that's what we really need to be like mindful of too, in terms of, especially with Pride, because what Pride in Canada comes with all these sorts of like, you have to do this and you have to do that. And, you have to like write a post about it, and you have to like hashtag Pride Toronto, and you have to like do all these sorts of things. But at the same time, if you're like too radical, right? If you talk about how queerness is often saturated in whiteness. They like shut you out, you know? Like I've had like pride events try to book me, and then they'll try and book me as the token person of color, and they're all like white cast, where I'm performing with like 7 other whites, and I'm like, this is not queerness. Like what is this? And then I get like removed from the show. So again, we start to see the ways in which, again, queerness, like dominant forms of queerness or queer powers, can also be very hegemonic, or very like, they become the colonizing force, you know? So that's why for me, like, coming out is not gonna save me, you know?
Yeah,
And there's this one Caribbean activist in New York named Rosamund S. King, and she always says, and I always bring this up, like, she says, what's the point of coming out of the closet if there's nothing on the other side of the door? You know? Like, what is there to offer so many queer people of color and so many Caribbean people when they're opening a door to just more oppression, right? Because if they come up, they still have to deal with racism, they still have to deal with misogyny, they still have to deal with classism, all these sorts of things that other white queers, especially like, you know, upper class white gay men, don't have to deal with, you know? So for them, obviously, queerness, coming out of the closet, becomes everything, because that's all they have to think about, right? But for other people, like especially Caribbean people, it's a multifaceted. It's like, queerness doesn't exist in isolation. Queerness always exists in relation to their race or their gender or their, you know, their ethnicity or their class or whatever.
Definitely. I also think, and I, like, as somebody who hasn't like formally come out or anything, and I know I think a few of our panelists have formally come out, if I'm not mistaken, and I do value that a lot, because without that experience as well, like, I wouldn't like have this kind of community, so that kind of representation as well, I definitely value. So if anybody wanted to speak on that, maybe Becky, I think you did come out to your family.
Oh yeah, the way I had to come out is because of the internet. So that's the whole thing. I mean, long story short, the internet didn't out me, but it was starting to get, people were viewing my stuff as, you know, somebody to look up to, and it was getting bigger. So it got to the point where it's like, it was starting to kill me in the inside, because like nobody besides my sister, like my parents didn't know what the fuck I was doing. Excuse my French. But like nobody knew what I was doing. Like literally they looked at me in my room like, what are you doing with this ring light? I'm like, nothing. As I'm wearing gray sweatpants. But jokes aside, in your honesty, my sister actually kind of helped me take the first few steps for that. And I don't know if I told you guys before, and my sister was texting me, she was like, yo, mom knows you're gay. And I'm like, oh, like, what did you do? I was like, well, I told her. My mom asked, well, is she gay? My sister was like, well, if she says she's not a tomboy, but she says she's not a lesbian. And then my mom went, what? But I mean, obviously, after my sister told me that, I didn't confront her. After, like, she's like, yo, like, when you come home, talk to your mom about this and this and this. But I didn't owe it to my mom to tell her that right then and there, because she knew. And it's like, it's not just because this big glorified thing, I need to tell her now, because now she knows and all of this. Mind you, my dad, we not on that page yet, you know, conservative, coolie man, you know. But, you know, until like I had my own choice, like my sister was looking at me in the living room saying, aren't you gonna say something? Because I'm like, no, this is what I want to do it on my own terms. So I sat down and I didn't even get to say it. I was like, so Liz told you about the people I dated. And she was like, look, ma'am, and I care if you're one unicorn, just clean your fucking room. So honestly, like that's her way to segue into being like, you know, just for her to be comfortable. It was just the fact of relief at the time. It didn't have to be something like, especially like, I know a whole bunch of us are on big platforms. We don't have to record the moment. And that's what I've seen, that a lot of people who aren't like us, honestly, like we don't have to put our whole entire life on them. These are things you can still keep private to yourself. And it's like, that's what makes it more special, because when you, obviously, I'm gonna be honest, we all know that we're not sure if it's going to be really cute like all these other Caucasian people. Like, oh my God, it's so cute. Like, no, we don't know if we're going to get one big back slap in the face. So it's like, you just have to wing it. Honestly, I didn't know how this was gonna end. I mean, till this day, me and my dad were kind of doing this eye contact thing. I haven't even told him completely. And yes, I am admitting this to the whole entire world right now. But it's just the fact of sense of security that I was able to tell the people who follow me right now that there's a chance. Like a little, even if it's not the biggest, but there's like a little glimpse of hope to like the little Caribbean kid who's sitting in their room right now, not even like 12 years old right now, who's sitting there confused about their sexuality or just their identity. And there's a possibility that it's gonna be okay. And I'm glad that I'm able to support that or just be that representation.
You're that representation for me. What the heck? Like, seriously, like, I think it's, like, as much as I don't identify really with that, like, I do value it. Maybe Nandini, if you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, if Mari doesn't want to go, I'll go. But if you want to go, Mari, first, I'm okay with that too.
Sure, yeah, I can jump in and talk a little bit about my coming out experience. My coming out experience was very complicated because it wasn't just like one singular event that happened in my life. It was, I proceeded to come out to my mom, I think, 3 times. The first was in high school when I was 14, and I broached the subject to her. It was actually a very difficult conversation because it was actually about my mental health, and my mom was like, well, what do you have to be mentally ill about? And I was like, well, I think I might be queer. And she was like, what? And basically, it was a very difficult situation. She cried. She was like, I'm never going to have grandbabies. I was like, I told you you were never going to have grandbabies. I don't know why this is a surprise now. And she actually, because I said I was like figuring it out, she sent me to therapy to help me figure it out. And so because of that reaction, I like went back in the closet and was like, just kidding, it was a phase, I'm straight. Meanwhile, I had crushes on all of my friends. And it was also because of that, I was like refused to like not be allowed sleepovers, which was like a thing I was just allowed to be able to do at 14. And they were like, well, you can't sleep over with girls if you like them. And I was like, then I can't have sleepovers at all? So that was like the first time I came out. And then, yeah, the next time I came out was when I was in university. I got published. I got a short story published. And in my bio at the back of the book, I mentioned that I was a queer writer. And my mom asked for a copy, and I figured, oh, like my bio's at the very back. She's not gonna like flip all the way to the back to like see if my name's back there. Of course she did. And of course she gave copies to like all of my family as well. And so she like flips to the back of the book and is like, what does this mean? Because I think actually the first time I came out, I used bisexual, and she was like, what does queer mean? And I was like, not straight. And she was like, oh.
Oh my God.
And, but at this point, like, we'd had that first conversation, and I guess, like, she kind of always figured I was lying about being straight again, even though I did have, like, a boyfriend at the time. And then the third time I came out was about my gender, and that was a couple years ago at this point, and it happened because we had a fight. And I blurted it out in a text message after I like stormed out of the house, all like very dramatic, and you know how it is. And so we ended up having that conversation, but like over the last like since I've was 14 to now, she's made like a ton of huge strides where she's made an effort to like learn more and talk more about it. And she has attempted to ease my coming out to the rest of my family by doing it for me. With her side of the family, at least not with my dad. I'm not, my parents are separated, so I'm not out to my dad or my dad's side of the family, although they might have figured it out through my Instagram and Twitter and all of those things where I post very loudly about it. But yeah, it was a very complex process. And, you know, even with the idea of, you know, not being out entirely, even with my mom being like outing me to her side of the family, we don't talk about it. It's actually something my family never actually brought up ever again. Like, my mom had that conversation with them, and then the next time I saw them, it was just business as usual, and everyone just treated me the exact same. Nobody made any comments, and it was just like, okay, I guess like we won't talk about it, but like it's not a secret.
Wow, your mom's an OG.
Yeah, like, is that what you hope for? Do you think she kind of told them not to bother you, or?
I think so, because she did ask me at one point if I wanted to like talk to the family about it, and I was like, no, I wanted you to ask me before you told them, but you know, cat's out of the bag, so can't take it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, that coming out should be a personal choice, and that if it's healing for you, do it. If it's not healing for you, if it's not good for you, then don't do it. You know, and I definitely agree that there's a lot around pressures to come out, and I also came out in like, I feel like about different things every time. Like I feel like I'm still coming out because I think there's more to know that I don't even know. So it's like a continual process. And I did come out first when I was 15. I was in the car with my dad, and he happened to be driving me that day to high school. And it was like, 15 was like a transformative year, because it was also like the year that like 9/11 happened. And like, it was like chaotic year. It was like everything was happening. I was like, I'm bi. I don't know what's going on. Like, people hate me. They don't know what type of brown I am. Like, there's just like all kinds of shit going on. And like, I was going through a lot. Like, I was really depressed, and it was because of mental health as well. Like, that I had to say something, and I didn't know how to. So what I did was like, I was like, oh, you know, like when I get older, I want to be like an LGBT like counselor. And I was like, had to phrase it as some kind of scholastic thing because of my parents and how they are. I was like, oh, I'll just phrase this like, you know, I'll just like kind of nudge at it and see what happens. And like, he was like, yeah, but you know, you really should think about psychiatry because there isn't money counseling. And I was like, oh my God.
Put it on the table, and they just like batted it.
Yeah, I was like, okay, guess the conversation's not gonna happen. So I did that. And then I ended up like telling my mom, like I ended up having like, I introduced my parents to like cis boys and men that I dated, because I felt like that was necessary to like sort of just eventually just like you know, like keep saying no, okay, let me not talk about this, let me not go into it, and then just like had secret crushes that I was like having on like different genders, and like just stuffing it back into the past. And also because I had like weird relationships in my life that did that with me too. Like, I had the first date I ever went on with like a woman, like her best friend like called me and told me that her parents are going to send her to Puerto Rico if they found out, and I needed to break up with her now. We had like one date. I was like, we're not even going out. Are we breaking up already? Like, this sucks. And like, it was just crazy. It was like too much. It was like a lot of pressure. And on top of that, didn't really have any representation of like who I really was. Like, I said I was bi, but I really didn't know if I was bi. I didn't know what was going on with me. I know I was pissed a lot and sad a lot, and that I was definitely different, you know, and like I didn't know in what way.
Going on.
Yeah, and I was really drawn to queer community. I was like, I don't know, like I'm just supportive, you know, and I think my most like Yeah, I think like my most I think I was most drawn to like men in drag actually. Like that was like I was like, I don't know why, but like I really feel a strong connection, which then led to me realizing many, many years later that I'm just trans. And that like what I was feeling about myself was that I'm performing all the time. And that sometimes I'm really good at the performance and I have my hair in and my eyelashes in. And sometimes I'm like dragging on it. And if I don't look in a mirror, I don't know. Like, you know, like it's just like if I'm not around anyone, I spend a lot of time like alone, like kind of like not allowing myself to see my transness, because then when I'm around people or walking around the street or around family, like I'm hyper aware of like, oh, my masculinity, shit, is that showing? And I kind of forget what I look like. So there's a lot of dysphoria that ended up leading to me coming out to my parents, because I'm in the house with them. I moved back in here a few years back, and so I have my own apartment in the same building, but we are in close proximity. I do still have a West Indian mom, so like I have texts from her, knocks at the door at the same time, and there's like always food at my door. Like sometimes she'll just leave it there, and I'm like, okay, cool. So when I told my parents that I was, when I first came out to them, I was like 30, so like 3 years ago was the proper coming out, and I sat them down and I had a convo with them, and my dad like flipped out. Like he was just like, oh my God, you're gonna die. You're not gonna make it. I was like, what? I'm not sick. Like, I'm not ill. Like, I'm just queer, you know, which is the word that I used. And his awareness of coming out, or what it meant to be like LGBT on any spectrum of it, was that you were going to be violated, or you were going to be in situations that were unsafe, or you were going to get AIDS. And so his understanding was so limited and so fear-based from the news in America, which we'd been in for so long. And then also his awareness in Guyana, which was totally related to like class and colorism, right? Like the darker skin you were, or whatever class that was like, looks like, or casteist rather, maybe more like that intersection between caste and class that still happens in Guyana and happened in Guyana. It's like his understanding of that was like, oh wow, like, you know, you're going to live a life that you're going to be targeted. Like now you're targeted. Are you happy? Like that's what you want? Like it was a choice. And my mom didn't say anything at all. She just stayed silent. And I was just so frustrated. I was just like, you know what? I don't like dicks. Dicks are disgusting to me. And then I walked out the room because I was just like in shock value, like status. Like I was like, you know what? Throw it in there. Throw I hate dicks in there. Just walk out.
Whole truth. Like
I don't even know why I said that. It was just like, I was just so mad that I was just like, penises suck. And then like, I get this text from my dad. Like I went upstairs and bawled my eyes out. Get this text message, and it's an image of Durga. Like I don't even know. Like it was literally like an image of Durga, and he was like, "I'm sorry," and I was like, "Yes, the whole goddess came down on your ass because she's the one who told me to come out to your ass. So now you see what's up." And so
wait, did you send that through WhatsApp?
He sent it to me just via text. There's just like a picture of Durga, and it just said, "I'm sorry." I was just like, you know, he doesn't have WhatsApp. He's not allowed to. He'll be talking to like everybody. He doesn't need. We don't need his opinions everywhere right now. Like
we got one of those like anti-chain messages that were like Durga's blessing. That's what you're talking about.
It wasn't one that glitters and moves or anything. It was just like a simple photo.
And he was like, damn.
No, my mom is the one with the gifts. Like she's advanced. But my mom didn't say anything about it. My sister had like sort of outed me multiple times throughout the years, where she'd be like, oh, you know that because my family calls me Philly. They were like, you know, Philly slept with blah blah blah, and would like throw out like this random woman's name or this person's name, and then my mom would be like, oh yeah, I know, and like go back to doing whatever she's doing. Never talks about it, never brings it up again. No convo, no anything. So like, did she really know? Like, you know, and like it wasn't like confusing names. Like these are people that would come over, sleep over, like hang out all the time, you know. It was so like in some way maybe my mom always knew, but there's like a lot of like denial, I think, in Indo-Caribbean culture to preservation denial, to keep living, to keep being, you know. Yeah. So Yeah, and then I finally came out the final time, and it's not the last one. I came out, actually, it was like a three-parter. I said I was in a polyamorous relationship, and my dad was like, "You're brave." Because I feel like he was saying he wants to do that. I'm not getting into that combo right now, though. And like, my mom shot him the dirtiest look I've ever seen in my life. And then I said that my mom said that's not for me, so she had her own opinions. Then I said that I was trans, and my dad was like shockingly nice. He's like on a lot of meds right now because he's sick, so I don't know if it was real or not, because it's so hard to understand. We have a shitty relationship a lot of the time, so he was really nice, and he was like, "Oh yeah, like we love you no matter what." I don't know if he was like he got the message the last time. My mom was like, "Yeah, you know, whatever your dad says." And we don't really talk about it. I said I use they them. I don't talk to them about he his. I did like have another conversation with my sister in the room where I was more open because her support was, it mattered that there was another person. That's another thing about coming out, is it could feel lonely if you're just talking to your parents. You might not say all the things. But I told my sister that I was thinking about like top surgery and thinking about transitioning, and that this is not just like coming out and being like, oh, I'm trans mass, but like that I'm really unfolding, you know? And that this also happened after I became sober. So like I was combating a lot of intergenerational trauma that led to me coming out. Like now I'm like, oh, now I know why I was always like feeling weird about what I saw in the mirror. It wasn't just that I hated myself or that I was ugly. It was that I'm not in the right body, you know, and that's confusing. So after all those times, I feel like there needs to be tons more conversations about it, but that's, and I mean, like they're going to keep continuing, hopefully, especially with my mom, I want to, but that's basically my multiple coming outs.
Thank you, everyone. You know, like it's so nice to talk about it with like, you know, kind of your tribe. Does anyone have anything else they want to say about coming out or anything?
Yeah, I was actually gonna bring something up because I think what Nandini said was really important about this notion of queerness as being like death always. Or I don't know if it was Nandini, maybe it was Mari who said it. Because I remember I've actually never told my parents, like this is what I'm saying. Like we all have different stories, but despite the work that I do, and like having like a public Instagram and like all this stuff and like who Tifa Wine is, I've never been like, hi, hello, like this is who I am. But I remember one time it came up where I was seeing someone a long time ago, and they came over to the house once, and my dad like threw a temper tantrum because he knew that like we weren't just like friends. And I remember my mom, she never asked me specifically, but she went to my sister and she was like, I just want to make sure Ryan is going to be okay. Like, is he safe and healthy? And I was like, what is like, and my mom is not even Caribbean, but you know what I mean? It was just like a moment where I was like, they've actually associated queerness. And I'm sure this has a lot to do with HIV stigma and the ways in which queerness gets attached to HIV. But yeah, it was like a really eye-opening moment because I'm like, okay, wow, they thought I was gonna die. Like they think they're like, you know, it wasn't so much about the queerness. It was like, I want him to live. And for her in that moment, that was, I think, like scary. It wasn't even about kids really or like anything like that. But she was just like, yeah, I don't want you to die. And it was just like, wow, because growing up in like Toronto or whatever, like I grew up in Mississauga, that was never like, I never associated being queer with like death, you know? But I also didn't live through the 80s and I didn't live through that scare. Right. But again, yeah, even in coming out too, like like what I'm saying, like I've never actually come out officially, which is why I'm very kind of critical of the ways in which coming out like becomes this kind of like regulating force, you know, like you have to like do all these things, or like even for me as like an artist, like I'm often asked to take part in these very like you know, these very homonormative spaces, these very like white queer spaces because I'm a drag queen, and I have to like, you know, I've even been in bar spaces where like I mean all of the stuff I perform is either soca or chutney or soca chutney. Like, that's all I form. I do that very politically because I'm like, I don't give a fuck about white people. Like, I'm not going to perform Lady Gaga. I'm not going to perform, like, you know what I mean? I'm like, they have 2 million twinks out here in the village doing those songs. Like, they don't need me to do that too, right? But I think
when Black Lives Matter had their whole thing in 2016 at Pride, I think that was about how homonormative it had become, and that all the queer spaces that were BIPOC were just like kind of put to the side. And at the time, I didn't even think of that, and I really didn't even think of that until very recently.
Yeah.
Oh, no, after you're good.
No, go ahead. I've been talking.
No, go.
No, I was just gonna say the last thing was I put together this article that's coming out where I was in conversation with a lot of QPOC performers and artists, and one of them actually said to me during the conversation was the village, like the Toronto village, because I was in Toronto, is actually dangerous. And they were like, yeah, like the village is not somewhere that I find peace or safety or belonging. And I think for me, like, that's how I also feel as well. Like, when I think about my people, I don't think about queers in general, right? I think about the queer Caribbean community, but I don't think about like queer space as like the place that I feel the safest, right? Because again, all these, I mean, we've seen this time and time again where queer people of color are always pushed to the margins, especially in queer space, right? Like, it's a known fact in Toronto where I'm from, like, that the QPOC spaces that are part of Pride are always either defunded first or they're pushed literally outside the margins of the village, right? I mean, it was only with the Black Lives Matter protest in 2016 that other spaces, the South Asian stage, other East Asian stages actually got their funding back because Black Lives Matter demanded it. But had it not been for that, like, all of these spaces would have been gone. And Pride would have just centered like whiteness and everything that it would do. So like, that's for me, that's why I'm kind of like, I don't really care about coming out, because I'm like, it doesn't do anything for me, you know, and it's not gonna be the thing to save me. And it doesn't really bring, like, I'm not broken inside, you know, as much as white queers would like to think so, that I'm not like fragmented and like crying at night because I can't wave my rainbow flag, you know. But yeah.
Something that like definitely like hit me was I'm one of the co-organizers of Virtual Pride, and a lot of things we faced of controversy was that some people thought that majority of the people in Virtual Pride were white, and they were running his whole entire organization for the people of all, and which was not true, because like they got all of us from different representation. Like, everyone's like, how are you gonna let all these white people do this representation? And meanwhile, there's me, and like, there's 2 Black girls in here. There's literally 2 other people who are literally of queer, and none of, like, literally, there's only 2 people who are white. And it was just an interesting thing, because a lot of people who were Black, they're like, no one's representing us whatsoever. And then we had to get Jack, who's like, that's not, like, Kiara was like, well, I can say something, and we're like, no, you should not, because it literally, Kiara, she literally is the one who started Virtual Pride, and she's like, I should say something. I was like, well, maybe not you. How about Jackie? And Jackie, she's Black, and she's a proud lesbian. And I was like, how about you let her speak for the rest of the Black community? Because it just looks funny if you are speaking for the behalf of diversity. So it's just like, I completely agree, because like, I know, like, it's a big thing down here where it's just like, you know, okay, coming out is I'm not gonna lie, it's a very Caucasian thing to do, and it's like, I have to say that from time to time. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I know this is gonna be a big thing in Canada, but over here, some people are okay with just being called white, some people don't. I don't get it either, but you know, here we are. But
is the like politically incorrect now?
Man. Hey, some people be telling me, but you're from the Middle East. I'm like, I'm from the where? How do you know? But no, yeah, definitely. It's you come down here, and like, especially in Atlanta, we embrace diversity so much. It's because that's what runs this, and we try to basically, like, that's why we put the Black Lives Matter movement with Pride, because literally it started off as a riot from a Black trans woman. And people tend to forget that, where you see literally even commercials, like even, you know, when mass corporations are literally like, hey, Pride, and you see like 2 white chicks or like these 2 white guys. And I'm saying, like, isn't he a paid actor? But no, like, I really wish that we could push that more. Because it's just like, you see all these cute little videos, like, oh my god, Pride. And you see, like, you know, the typical girl in blonde with the red Converse. You know what I'm talking about. You've never seen the picture, but you know what I'm talking about. And it's just so aggravating, because there's so much potential that we could push as a society. But it's so crazy that we're supposed to be the, how do you say, how do I say, the more evolved of society, or more open to society, and we still divide ourselves in a way to see what's more comforting to other people of like the hetero society.
Yeah,
it's like, hey guys, look at us.
Version.
Pardon?
It's like a watered down version of what it really is.
It's like, hey guys, look at Pride. Here's literally a drag king, and here's a drag queen, and they're both white. You don't see anybody who are disabled. You don't see anybody who's in the ASL. You don't see anybody who, like, literally, like, I think the happiest thing that I ever saw was, like, 2 years ago, before, like, Pride, there was a Caribbean association who was literally, they were, like, playing Masha Montano, and there was just so much diversity. And it was, and they had, you know, it was great. It was one token white kid. One token one. Like, the roles were flipped.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot about, you know, the reasons for why people come out that I never really thought about, you know, like in terms of bringing that up, like that, yeah, it is about like this sort of like white standard, and that there's a lot of violence for people of color coming out. Like, not everybody can come out or needs to come out or wants to or is going to be safe when they do. And a lot of people get kicked out of their homes, end up houseless, homeless, and like dealing with a lot of poverty and violence for coming out, you know? And I think like the reason why I've chosen to do that was because for me, like, it was part of my work with like Children of Kali, where like I was like talking to I wanted to start this whole thing where I was talking about like anti-blackness between like Indo-Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean people. And I realized to even have that conversation, like I needed to talk to my parents about all the ways that they were problematic, you know? And so it started that was actually what brought up the thing, right? It's like they were open enough to talk about stuff. First of all, like that's something I never give them credit for, is that the reason why I could even talk to them is because more than any other part of my family, they were actually open to listen to some things, even if they fought with me or they had different disagreements about it, you know? And a part of coming out was actually like educating my parents and learning from that, you know? And like, I don't know if anyone's into astrology, but I'm a Mercury Libra, and it's part of like literally written into my stars that like when I communicate about things, I actually learn from it too. So it's kind of been like, you know, my free research to talk to another generation about things that they have no concept of, that even I now have language for, you know, like to be in my 30s and coming out the way that I am. I never fucking knew who I was. I never knew half the shit about myself. Like now I'm learning about myself, and I'm actually doing that through talking to them. And like when they tell me problematic stuff, I assume that that's inside of me. And then I'm like, oh, okay. Now that I see all the stuff that came out of you that you're freely being messy about, I know I'm probably hiding that because I've learned how to. Like, I live in a society where there's like public shaming, and like we're taught to like, you know, post about knowing stuff but not have to know it. Like, you know, we're all cheating on the test. And like I really feel like I've learned a lot from talking to my parents and coming out to them. Like, so there's value in it if you're gonna be okay, if you're gonna be safe, you know? And I've been like breaking my parents in for like 15 years to get to the place to tell them that. Like, I've been telling them all kinds of messy stuff and like pushing the boundaries for so long. And we also grew up outside of like West Indian neighborhood. Like, we weren't reinforced by that, like someone's gonna find out, your neighbor's gonna know, your auntie's gonna know, this is gonna know. My parents don't even like their siblings anymore, so it's like nobody's gonna find out, so they don't care, you know? And there's a lot of like pain and hurt for like coming out when you know other people are gonna find out, like the shame of it, or like who's gonna tell who, or how this is gonna affect them. And my parents at this point, you know, they don't really care, you know, like they're also both Scorpios, so they really don't care like what other people are think about them in the family, you know, they're just in their own little world. And like that also matters too. And I think that also, like the fact that there is pressure to come out, I didn't even think about that, you know, because there never should be. Like, nothing is going to take away from you who you really are. Like, coming out doesn't give that to you, and it doesn't take it away from you to like not come out, you know, for sure.
For sure. I think for me, especially, like, my partner right now, like, is a cis, like, straight man. So that's just, like, I don't even know how to be like, I'm queer, but, like, not right now. Like, without them, I don't even know how they would conceptualize that. So,
you know, that boggles my mind too, because I do know a lot of like Guyanese or Indo-Caribbeans who are bisexual, but their boyfriends are like are homophobic, but they're still with them, and they hide that.
It's definitely like, I feel like it's just very like multi-layered again, like, and that's when, like, when Ryan brought up the thing about queerness being more than just like my sexuality, like, right, like, it's just a big part of my identity, and like, it's always been a part of my identity, like, just the queer community, like, all my friends are gay, so like, it just kind of, I don't know, like, birds of a feather kind of thing, like. But yeah, like, I don't really know how to like articulate or explain it, but just like especially hearing like, Nandini, what you're saying, like, my dad is like my soundboard, and like, he never ever tells me to quiet down. Like, I'm always screaming at him, and like, when I'm wrong, like, I can't cuss at my dad or anything, obviously, like, I'm not disrespectful to him, but when I'm wrong, like, I have to walk away because I have to reformulate what I was talking about, because obviously I didn't know what I was talking about if I can't get across to my dad, like, because that's the person who put it in me, like. So it's just I really like that, because I feel like a lot of people don't have that openness with their parents. So what are some stigmas and stereotypes around the queer community that currently exist in our culture? I think we talked about a lot of them, but were those standards that you were raised around? Like, did you really hear about them? Or did it only kind of come up when you came out? If anybody wants to start.
Man, I'm telling you, I don't understand why, but they're literally like, when you're growing up, to be like, oh, you better go to sleep or the auntie man will get you, the bati man. It's like, what? Like, I'm like, what? And then like, you get older and understand what this terminology means. You're like, what? A gay man is going to what? Not hug me in my sleep? Like, what am I gonna do? Like, I don't understand why they use that as such a scary thing. Or like, you'll see like these little sitcoms or like these music videos, and like every time there's a gay man, or like, because like for some reason they make such more humor about gay men than they do about like lesbians in like the Guyanese community, because they don't really dabble too much on like the queer or trans community whatsoever. They just dabble on those two a lot more, but they like make it more of a humorous thing for like more like gay men, and like they'll be like in a music video, and then like the hetero man is like running because like the guy, the gay man, is so desperate, or like, you know, Texonita, literally. There's a whole music video about that, about how she literally steals like, what is it, this guy's girl, and like they make it out in this car. Like, you see how like they make that so normal, but if you were a gay man, it's like, oh no, it's the worst thing ever. Like, I don't get it.
Definitely some like hypersexual thing that like, I think that goes with the like, I don't know, colonialism. I'm just gonna chalk that up to colonialism. Like,
I can say, like, just because I do some of this work like in school, like I think specifically when we're talking about the Indo-Caribbean, it also has to do with masculinity, and sort of like, you know, especially with men being, you know, like the breadwinner that is supposed to take care of the family and do all this sorts of work. So I know, even like for me, in my personal experience, I don't think my queerness is so much of a problem because I'm attracted to men. I think it's because it disrupts the system of masculinity, where the coolie man or the Indo-Caribbean man is supposed to like carry on his father's reputation and his father's prestige in this particular type of way. Right. And so when you're, when you're up here with another man, it like completely disrupts this notion that of what Indo-Caribbean masculinity is like supposed to be. Right. And I think even particularly Indo-Caribbeanness is always imagined as heterosexual. Right. Just like the Indo-Caribbean community always, not the community, but just like the ways in which it's always talked about is like queerness as like a white thing. Right. Or like, you know, I've heard people in community say stuff like, oh, like being gay or being a lesbian or being a queer woman or whatever, that's for white people.
Yeah, like you're being white. Yeah.
Down here, know.
You're white. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to say that a lot.
But then even like he was saying, like those songs like Texanita and like all these other things, like the Caribbean has always been queer. You know what I mean? Like those people have always been there. And, you know, it's also really interesting for me to like, I talk about my work like chutney a lot. And it's interesting because something happens in a wedding space. I don't know what happens, but as soon as Dripati comes on or Lotila comes on, the men get on the floor. They forget about their masculinity. They forget about it. Okay. And so I was like, y'all can't come and fucking police us when you come from a genealogy of queerness. You come from a history of queerness. You know what I mean? Or like even, I've been doing my exams for my PhD, and I've been thinking a lot about how also Indo-Caribbeans, if we're talking about stigmas, are always considered like we're like the not real brown people by like South Asians. Like we're like considered like inauthentic and like strange and like untranslatable and all this stuff. And I was doing a lot of reading, and I actually found out like the way in which India particularly constructed itself during times of nation building was by situating the Indo-Caribbean woman or the Coolie woman as like the opposite of what India should be. Because the Coolie woman was uneducated. She was, by their standards, promiscuous, because a lot of people who were indentured laborers were sex workers, right? The Coolie women, they were often low caste. They were often women escaping domestic abuse. They came to the Caribbean on their own. They didn't come with men. Like if we look at the indentureship records, like most Coolie women, there was two, like it was like 3-1 or 2-1 Coolie women to one man. So all of our ideas, you know, we're talking about polyamory and relationships and all this sort of stuff. Caribbean women have been the ones to mash up everything because they entered a space that was non-normative. They came to the Caribbean where they were like no men. So relationships and sex and like family, everything was queer. Like everything, and I don't mean queer in terms of like sexual identity. I mean queer in terms of like non-normative, right? And so like it's so, you know, it seems like such a contradiction when Indo-Caribbean communities are super queer phobic or transphobic or homophobic, because when chutney comes on, like what do you think you're dancing to? You're dancing to legacies of Indo-Caribbean women who are literally mashing it up, like who are literally transgressing on the boat. Like that is what chutney comes out of. So yeah, I would say I think we have to combat with different stereotypes. On the one end, it being like homophobic stereotypes that you guys were talking about, but on the other end, like the double kind of queerness of Coolie people, because you know we're always seen by by India or South Asia or like you know the subcontinent as people who always were not real brown people, right? And so like for India to construct itself as India, it had to displace us. It had to thrust us out because they needed a nation that was built upon our departure.
I never thought
right?
about that.
Yeah, so I even think about like people who are like a lot of Indo-Caribbean people. Like I get in a lot of debates about Indo-Caribbean people who are like, we should be Indian. We should just like try and be South Asian. And I'm just like,
No.
can y'all not? Like literally, we left for a reason, okay? Like, and you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like you know, I always say to my students too, I was like, Indo-Caribbeanness begins in departure. You know what I mean? Like our identities begin in departure. So why are we trying to claim, just like queerness, why are you trying to claim something that wasn't made for us? They literally made Indianness with our departure. Like it's ridiculous. And that's why I'm always like Coolie to the end. Like to the death of me, I will be Coolie. I will never claim South Asianness ever for that reason.
Coolie to the bone.
Yeah.
I think for a long time I was like trying to grasp at every like Indian thing I could, because like especially because I'm like only half Indo-Caribbean, I was just like, okay, like I'm just gonna do this. So especially, and I wanted to also kind of bring this in, and I know Nandini, you were saying you do work and like talking about anti-Blackness and those kind of stereotypes, and I think that really comes into play when we're talking about the way gender roles play out and the kind of looseness that Indo-Caribbeans give to some members of the community to play with gender, and then quickly flip that around and talk about why do Black people dance that way and this and that, and policing. I guess the kind of culture of policing is kind of the thing.
Yeah, it's like, it's interesting to bring up like gender, because I do think that that's a big thing that plays into the stereotypes around queerness and transness. You know, it's like if you're not doing this right and doing it proper, then like you know, there's something wrong with this, it's going to be noticed, it's going to affect us somehow. And that comes from like indentured like fear also, you know. It's like, get your shit in order, always be perfect, you know, like white people are watching, like don't fuck up, you know, like you want to not call attention to yourself and you want to do what's right and get it done. And we want to get out of this, you know what I mean? And like this constant, like this like fear that got embedded into us about like performing properly, you know. And then there's also like a patriarchal, like, you know, heritage of that from South Asia, right? It's like there were some people that went over into the Caribbean that were married, that were separated at first. And when they got there, their like husbands were like, you know, angry with them for like getting sexually assaulted, disowning them, like had become alcoholics. There was like a whole mess of like of that. And then there was this change also from like what was like allowed in terms of like brown men and how you can experience your gender. Because I think that gender in different cultures and countries, it doesn't really look like the way it does in like the Americas, you know, or in Canada. And like I feel like there's this thing that I grew up with too. Like I used to see pictures of like my uncles, like some of them had like pigtails and stuff when they were little. My mom was like, you know, if you get cologne, you wear it, you don't add, like there's cologne perfume, it doesn't matter, like you just wear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like my mom's like, you don't know, you wear a dress, you got this, what you got. There's also a level of like class to it too, because it's like my parents like grew up poor. Like you all made dresses out of one curtain and you all wear dresses then. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it's like that's just what it is. Like you're not asking for, like, it was almost like to have a gender role and perform it in like this like white, like Eurocentric or American way was a quote unquote like privilege. So I think eventually it was like this thing of like, oh, we want to perform this well, we finally can, now we can wear clothes that match this thing, now we can be like this and this. And then there was this sort of added lens, because like a lot of the music that I've heard that is like homophobic, you know, is like Afro-Caribbean music, and we listen to it, we dance to it, right? But it's like we don't understand where that comes from also. It like there's a lot of pressure on Black men to perform masculinity in a certain way and to deny their feelings, like, you know, and that bleeds into our culture as well. But like in our culture, like men often are like the ones that everybody listens to, that everybody goes to for advice, that everybody like sort of looks to as like the patriarch is really revered. You know, it's really unfortunate. Like there's sometimes where I don't even like ask my mom about shit because I have this internalized like sexism towards like what she's gonna say. I'm like, oh, it's just my mom, whatever. Even when she used to beat my ass, I never felt like she beat my ass as bad as my dad did. I was like, you know what, whatever, her beatings aren't even shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I wouldn't even give her credit for her beatings. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I was just like, oh, it's just my mom, you know? Like, there's this sort of like lesser energy there that I grew up around. And that also is why we don't even look at, you know, being a lesbian or being queer. Like when we think about women, we're not questioning that, because like we've also been like oppressed in a way within our own communities and families. Like those of us like, you know, assigned female at birth or who identify as cis women, like you're often socialized in a certain way where like, why would I even question what the hell you're doing? You're going to do what I want anyway, because that's our culture, you know? And there's that lens to it too, where I think there's more question on like masculinity and whether or not you're queer. And I also hear you on the dancing. I would always think that when I was a kid. I was like, y'all are all up on each other. Like this is getting nasty and y'all are really liking this. So and it's like, it's great. It's like amazing to watch. And I grew up around that, absorbing that. And that actually, when I started realizing my transness, dancing is what connected me and helps me still to like heal when I have dysphoria. You know, like when I'm going through a lot in terms of like my inside not matching my outside, like I dance, because when I dance, all that coolie man shit, like all that party vibe, it's like there. And I remember all my uncles when they drink a little bit and they're just, I'm like, y'all are all gay and you're coming out to me right now. Like, you know, but there's so much queerness. But I once told my father this too. Like there was one brother that he had that passed away from like addiction, which I thought was like also, it's like an inheritance from colonialism, but also about us hiding ourselves, right? Like we lean towards escapism when we're escaping who we really are. And I brought up this one uncle and I was like, you know, I feel like we had a bond because he was like on some spectrum queer. Like, I don't know if he was trans or if he was gay or what, but like he like always liked to like, we had like this bond, and it just felt like it was about that. Like, he would like comb my hair and tell me what jewelry to wear, and like he always listened to like bad like 80s music with saxophones in it. Like, I don't know, like he was on his own trip. He had like one earring on, and like he just like always was stylish, but in like an awkward way. And like I don't know, I just got a vibe from him. And when I brought it up to my dad, he was like, no, he slept with a lot of women. And I was like,
Oh yeah.
that is not an indication, because I told you I don't like dick, and I've slept with a lot of dudes. Like, so like that's definitely not an indication who you sleep with. We all lie to ourselves for like many, many years before we can tell the truth, and especially around addiction. Like, there's a lot of lying to yourself. So I feel like the gender roles thing, if we can sort of come together and agree that we will stop placing like pressure on men to be a certain way or women to be a certain way, and just acknowledge that there isn't even a binary, like that's all like not even real, and that we can be whoever the fuck we want, I think it'll erase a lot of that needing to perform that in art as well.
I kind of want to jump back to the idea of like queerness as white and kind of look at the like flip side of it. And it's kind of like the stereotype that our community is inherently like homophobic and transphobic and all of these things. And it was the reason that I actually, so I grew up in a suburb outside of Toronto that's predominantly white. And so I didn't grow up with any other Indo-Caribbeans that weren't just my family. And my parents, their reasoning for a lot of like their problematic thing was it's the culture. And so growing up, I was just like, it doesn't jive with me though. Like, I don't feel like this is, like, I agree with that. And if that's the culture, then I don't really want to be a part of it. And so I really distanced myself from being Indo-Caribbean, being brown, being anything, and trying to really assimilate into like whiteness and white culture, and especially like white queer culture. Mm-hmm. My Indo-Caribbeanness is something I'm only like reconnecting with now, and it's something I'm only like learning about now through like a lot of conversations with like my mom. But yeah, like I think that there is this idea that like we are inherently homophobic or transphobic or whatever, and that also creates this sort of like harmful dynamic where we feel like we can't, you know, identify with both of our identities. Like, we have to choose between queerness and our identity. And I feel like I really missed out on a lot of like myself and like getting to know people who actually understood my experiences, because I was very much just like, oh, the only other Indo-Caribbean people I meet are either going to be like family or they're going to be homophobic.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that picture, you know, that meme of two Spider-Mans that go like this? That's how I feel every time I meet somebody in the LGBTQIA+ community. I'm not gonna lie, because I'm sitting here like, you look like me, like, you know, like, I'm just like you, you're just like me.
Yeah, your comment about like the two Spider-Mans looking at each other, that actually reminds me about something that I wrote about for Extra Magazine, which is like a Canadian queer publication here. But, you know, that kind of reminds me of like when white queers point to like racialized communities to be like, y'all are homophobic and you know, you're the problem, and like you're the backwards one, and all of that. And it just reminds me of that sort of like the two Spider-Mans just like pointing at each other, because like so much of that, like those ideas and those concepts came from whiteness. Like, it came from colonization, it came from a destruction of our cultures, and, you know, trying to erase our histories and you know, the things that are true. I know, you know, Ryan was saying like he doesn't like to you know, associate, like, I look back to like South Asianness, but, you know, something that really connected me with my identity was learning about like the hijra in India, which is like a third gender, or like the term that they use for their transgender community. And, you know, to know that there was this historical precedence of like having trans people in our, you know, culture, and that the only reason that they aren't valued was because of, you know, British imperial rule, you know, it really like changed things for me because it made me feel more connected to a history. And, you know, knowing that, you know, similarly to like Two-Spirit people and, you know, like a lot of other racialized communities pre-colonization, you know, we were considered, you know, spiritual, like spiritual people, and considered, you know, valuable in our communities, you know, before white people came in and said that's wrong. And so, yeah, like every time I think about, you know, like
a baby,
you know, every time I think about, you know, white queers pointing towards racialized communities being like, well, you're the homophobic ones, I'm like, well, where did we get it from?
Yeah, honestly, it's true. I was just saying that to my best friend is Jamaican, and like he's bisexual, and we were just talking about it today. I was like, it's crazy how gay was okay before white people were like, no. Like, it was like, imagine what the world could have been, right? Like,
yeah, and it definitely blows my mind. Like, for example, so like my last name, like this, I had a conversation with this white person. They're like, well, we didn't do anything. I'm like, think about it. My dad's name is Lionel. His dad's name was Arthur. My last name is Dundee, and I was raised Christian. Think about that. And I was like this, I am what you made. But it also surprises me, though, because like you were just talking about our history and our past. And when it comes into religion, because my mother's a Hindu as well. So it's like, in Hinduism, being like cross-dressing was a thing. Having like same-sex, like the Congress doesn't have a problem with that. And it's literally like Krishna literally cross-dressed so many times. And it's just like, sex was normal, and it was such a normal thing. And especially even in Christianity, it was found like there's no word in the Bible that literally means homosexual. That word was supposed to be translated as pedophilia. Oh, so it boggles my mind that it takes a lot of work and energy to change a mind and a culture of somebody you don't even know. Like, obviously we can't go back and be like, give me back my culture right now. I mean, there's a lot of damage that is done. But the best way we can all do it as an Indo-Caribbean or Afro-Caribbean community is to educate people, because it's such a big taboo, especially in the Caribbean, the West Indies, where it's like, oh, well, it's not okay. And then like think of it like our version, like, what are you guys' version of Fox 5? What's y'all's version of Fox 5? It's kind of like a psychological thing, like when it comes to CNN and Fox 5. Most Republicans will watch Fox 5 because they're more comfortable with knowing that knowledge versus people who are very Democrat. They'll listen to CNN because no one likes to hear things that they don't want to hear. So unless you sit down and like, obviously people who are willing to educate themselves and it spreads, then you'll be fine. But if we continue, I hate to genuinely say this, but it literally goes to this. My sister, when she went to Romania, she came back and talked to me. She had this deep conversation with this one guy. He was like, a whole generation has to die before change happens. And it sounds very, very dark. But the ones that we can talk to, that could mean so much to people. And we just don't have that platform. I mean, we have people who speak, but then when they go to like LA or like the bougie type of like media, they do things that don't make sense.
Like, I wanted to also say what you brought up about, you know, like talking to, like bringing up the conversation. I realized that like when we talk about like queerness and transness and being gay or being lesbian, I feel like a lot of times that there isn't a conversation in our community because people don't want to talk about sex, and they are associating it with sex. So then they're like, oh, we're not going to talk about it. Although there's a lot of coolie jokes about like body parts, and there's nasty shit going on, and aunties be saying shit that when I was growing up, I was like, what? And they'd be like, don't worry about that, you know? And like, you know, my aunties and my mom always had like the dirtiest jokes, and then I realized later what was going on there. But so there's a lot of that, but there isn't a conversation around like actual sex. Like, you know, like there's jokes around it, but there isn't like talking about like different forms of sexuality, like how you express yourself sexually, you know. and what that might mean. And I think that that's what comes up too, is like there's this like confusion because people aren't really talking about sex. Like if maybe we talked about sex a little bit more, then we would be able to talk about sexuality, you know, and we was able to talk about gender, and we're not doing that. So there's a missing link in the convo.
Yeah,
oh, fun fact.
Dancing and stuff, like even like with my aunts and stuff, like the way I grew up dancing with my aunts, and then when I started to go out like to the clubs or whatever, and then I was like, these people just like dance with random strangers this way, like, and like I just, my like conceptualization of like the way you use your body and like sexually, like all of that is just so different than the way white people look and probably think about the way that we dance. And as well, like Indian people just are so disconnected from what our dancing and what our, the way that we play with gender is so kind of like loosely in our culture and sexuality. And again, it's like that was always just something that was on the table, like that's just how we dance, that's fine, but we never talk about it. And you're so
fun fact, I decided, so like when COVID became a thing, I decided to go on Tinder and I wanted to do that passport thing. Did you know it's unsafe to go to be in the LGBTQIA plus community in Guyana? It's deemed unsafe.
Yeah.
The same way they do in the Middle East.
Yeah.
I was curious and I was like,
does it show you on Twitter that you're not safe or something? What do you mean?
So like, what you say, like when you do the passport thing, you just click a location. I clicked the location. They're like, we're gonna move you somewhere else because it's deemed unsafe. Like the fact that Tinder was like, this is not safe in this area, but Trinidad and Jamaica was fine.
Yeah.
Jamaica.
Yeah.
This shows how bad this is. I'm telling you. Guyana, I guess you can say, like, I'm just going to speak for the Guyanese community. We have the potential to be something amazing if we decided to be open-minded and educate ourselves. And besides just that, the Indo and Afro-Caribbean community could become such a phenomenon if we open our minds and stop. That's what's stopping us from being, like, economically a third world country. That's what's stopping us to become literally like the rest of the people, because we're so deemed that everyone wants something from us, or we're too caught up like, no, this is this and this because they did this or they did that. I'm like, okay, what about you? They're dead. What do you want to do? You know?
That kind of goes really well with our next kind of topic about finding comfort in community and building resilience through that dialogue. So like navigating those conversations with your families and the older generation, and I guess it would be the younger generation as well. I never really thought about it like that, but that totally makes sense, right? Like obviously being somebody, like I'm like the youngest one in my family, so I never really thought about passing all this stuff on, but Jesus. So how do we educate and try to change that narrative while taking care of ourselves and our own mental health? And are there any resources that you guys recommend that are not just for those of the queer Indo-Caribbean community, but for their families and friends? And
so yeah, like I've actually been having a lot of, like, so as I said, I've been having these conversations with my mom for like a really long time. And, you know, like in the same way that like Nandini, you know, has been, you know, trying to address like anti-Blackness in like Indo-Caribbean communities, I've been trying to address anything that I found problematic in my own home. And so this led to like a lot of fights when I lived at home, especially. But, you know, like there would be a lot of these like huge blow-ups where I'd say like, I don't agree with what you're saying. You know, I think that's wrong, you know, all of these things. And, you know, a lot of the times it would like end up in like big screaming matches where I'm calling my mom a racist, and you know there's all kinds of like cussing happening, and you know shoes are flying, everything's happening. But because I started those conversations when I was young, it got easier and easier as I got older, especially because me and my mom do have a really good relationship, and she has always tried to, you know, after every fight she does the West Indian mom thing where she knocks at your door with like some tea and some fruit and is like, I made you some tea, like, and just acts like everything's chill.
It's better when it's cut up by your mom. That's a fact.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, like she would definitely always try to approach me afterwards and mend the relationship in whatever way she could. And eventually it got to the point where we'd actually address the issues that would come up in these big fights, and after things cooled down, would actually be like, you know, this is what I was trying to say. I got really heated and I know I started cussing, but like, this is, you know, where I'm at. And my mom would, you know, come and be like, oh, you know, like when I was like back home, like this is what we were taught, and, you know, this is what we saw all the time. And we actually had these kind of exchanges of, you know, like, especially because I have a lot of academic knowledge about anti-oppression and like the queer community and things like that. It has created these really great conversations where I give her that like academic knowledge, but she gives me the lived experience that makes it all make sense. And we can kind of find this like middle ground where it's like, yeah, like I did grow up in a very like predominantly white neighborhood with, you know, predominantly white people and predominantly white friends. And so a lot of these concepts that seem very familiar to me are things that are only spoken about in like white spaces in the language that I was using. And so sometimes we had the same ideas, but because I was using academic language, it just wasn't connecting. And so actually like finding common language for us and being able to be like, how do I relate this to you in a way that makes sense? I actually like really opened up the conversation, and now we actually have conversations where like I called my mom on the phone the other week to just be like, hey, do you want to talk about like defunding the police? And she was like, actually, yeah, I do want to talk about it. And we had this whole conversation about like, you know, like, why should we defund the police? What would, you know, replace the police? And, you know, at the end of the conversation, she was like, yeah, you know, I really agree with everything. And I think like that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, like, there was no screaming. I didn't call her a racist once. And, you know, like it took over a decade to get here, but like we got here, and like, so it is like definitely possible to have those conversations.
I love that. I think that's a really nice place for us to all end off. If anyone has any closing thoughts or anything that they want to share, I just want to say thank you again to everybody. That was so, I keep saying this about 2020, but my brain is like tingly. That's how I feel about it. You guys are making my brain tingly. Anybody have any closing thoughts?
I just want to say thank you all, and thank you, Mari. That was like really important to hear about bridging the gap through language, like, and finding commonality, because I really am struggling with that sometimes, and I'm getting to a better place with it with my mom especially. And also wanted to add about community, like finding comfort in community, that like it's really important that the Indo-Caribbean people I connect to aren't just Indo-Caribbean, but that they're like also part of queer community, you know? And like that's where actually I feel more comfortable, because on a totally different level than it is for like the support of like sisterhood. I don't have that. And even when I am in like circles of cis women, like there is this sort of otherness that shows up and things that I can never talk about. So I think the comfort in community and the things that I've been finding, like, it's really strange, like happening during the pandemic, because it forced us all online in such an intense way that I feel like I've been like really feeling connected to, you know, like all the folks in here and like just people that are Indo-Caribbean online, just being like, hey, this is where it's safe to be queer. Like, you know, and just like seeing everyone living their lives, you know, it's really important. So thank you.
Sure. Ryan, want to closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just say something quick. Yeah, thanks again. This has been really, really great. I think also one thing is like a lot of these conversations or whatever take place during Pride Month, and then people forget about it, especially those that like aren't queer. And it's like, even, you know, I was talking today about even this moment that we're in with where anti-Blackness has this kind of heightened presence, like on, especially in spaces that would never talk about this before, like mainstream media and news. And, you know, I'm seeing a lot of people post stuff that for years haven't said anything, which is, you know, it's really hard to see sometimes, because it's like you didn't care before. I mean, I'm glad you care now, but I just really hope that these conversations and these conversations we need to be having in relation to and in conversation with other communities, right? Like, you know, the Indo-Caribbean role, or the Indian community and their relation to anti-Blackness, right? Like, these can't be conversations that only exist for like when it's Pride Month,
Yeah, when it's
or when something like disastrous happens. Like, these need to be ongoing conversations that we're having. And, you know, people just can't be like wave their rainbow flag for 4 days and then just like forget about queer struggle or queer liberation or, you know, racial justice for the rest of the year, you know? So I'm really glad that this came together. But I think to the people that watch that, you know, aren't queer, or, you know, are queer allies or whatever, but are still complicit in these structures, need to like do the work to like listen, not just us, but to other communities caught in other struggles for more than like a couple days a year, or just posting on Instagram like once in their life, right? Which, I mean, posting is great too, but also we need like long-term allyship. We don't need like temporal allyship. So
Tell them. Tell them.
yes. So I think that's really important, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now. We're seeing a lot of performative allyship, which isn't really helpful in any capacity. So we need to actually be not performative and be real.
For sure.
Yo, thank you so much for saying that. If you pretend that you're safe and people go into those spaces, they get violated, they get hurt, and it really fucks shit up. So it's really important that you're living in the work behind the posts. It's so real.
Yeah.
Mari, Becky.
Oh, yeah. Well, honestly, I want to say thank you to all of you guys. Like, Lily, Mari, you gave me ways that I wish I could I'm going to try to communicate with my parents. I'm not going to lie. Nani, you literally gave me hope that I can literally be as chill with my parents the way you are. And literally, I kid you not, Ryan, you're just badass. I'm not going to lie. You're just badass. I want to have the confidence you do. Like, literally, I want to strut it out like that. But honestly, you guys give me a lot to like think about, honestly, and I genuinely appreciate that, because it's different when you're just chilling in your little clean queer area, us alone by yourself, and then like you see from like you meet so many other people, and it's so like not even shocking. It's just amazing to meet everyone all over the world, and knowing that I'm not the only one. And for the people who are watching this, I know people are gonna watch this to the end. This is for you guys. If or when you decide to come out, it's okay. Some family will not be there for you, and that's totally fine. That's how you know who are the real ones. And trust me, they weren't shit anyways. You got more family here. Look, we're here. We are here. You can create your own family. Blood does not have to be thicker. So
I love that. Oh, that was so.
Yeah, I just want to echo everybody else and just say thank you for all of these conversations. I feel like I really learned a lot, and I really feel more connected to the community, which is something that I have been desperately needing in my life. So I'm glad that we could learn from each other today, and that I could hear all of your experiences and just the different ways that being queer in Indo-Caribbean can just look like. So thank you.
Sweet. Wow. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone so much. I'm just gonna spend the rest of the night like this. Thank everyone so much. I think that really summed it up super beautifully, Mari. Like, this conversation has just painted such a diverse picture of, you know, our community, queer and Indo-Caribbean, and that, you know, we can be both, and we all are both. That's really sweet. So thank you, everyone.